I still remember the way his voice sounded that night, cold, final, like he'd already made the decision for me. Serve my mother or leave. Those were the words my husband, Daniel, spoke to me as I stood in our small kitchen, still wearing my hospital scrubs, my shoes damp from the rain. I had just worked a 12-hour shift on my feet, helping patients, calming families, skipping my own meals. All I wanted was to come home, shower, maybe have a warm meal and some peace. Instead, I walked into the middle of a storm. His mother, Evelyn, was waiting for me at the door like a warden. She pointed at the laundry basket and said, "Why are the towels still damp? You don't know how to fold properly, do you?" Then she pointed to the rice cooker. "You made the rice too soft last night. I can't eat mush." No hello. No. "How was your day?" Just criticism, as always. I forced a tired smile, murmured something polite, and headed to our bedroom to change. I thought maybe Daniel would notice the dark circles under my eyes. Maybe he'd say something kind. But when I walked into the kitchen 10 minutes later, still wet from the rain, Evelyn was standing over him, whispering. Her eyes shot daggers at me the second I entered. Daniel stood up and faced me, and that's when he said it. "You either serve my mother or leave this house." Just like that. No warning, no discussion, as if I was an employee on probation. I stood there frozen. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed still. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I married 8 years ago. The man who once wrote me love notes on napkins and stayed up all night helping me study for nursing school, now looked at me like I was a burden. "Serve her?" I asked quietly, trying to understand. "Yes," he replied. "She's family. She's staying here. She needs help. It's your duty as my wife." "And what about me?" I asked. "Who takes care of me?" He didn't answer. He just turned away, grabbed his drink, and sat back down as if the conversation was over. I felt something snap in me, not loudly, quietly, like the last thread of a rope giving way. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just walked to our bedroom, pulled out my small suitcase, and began packing. A pair of jeans, some shirts, my toothbrush, my scrubs. I didn't even bother with shoes beyond the wet ones on my feet. Evelyn watched me from the hallway, arms crossed, smirking like she'd won something. When I zipped the suitcase and rolled it out, Daniel finally looked up. "What are you doing?" I stopped at the door. My hand shook slightly as I gripped the handle. "You told me to leave?" I said. "So I am." He stood up, confused now. "Wait, you're seriously leaving?" I nodded. "You gave me a choice. I made mine." Evelyn said nothing. Daniel opened his mouth again, but no words came. Maybe he thought I'd beg him to change his mind. Maybe he thought I'd cry, throw a fit, ask for another chance. But I didn't. I couldn't. I stepped outside into the rain. Cold drops hit my skin, but I didn't flinch. I just walked. Past the driveway, past the roses I had planted 2 years ago, past the gate. And I didn't look back. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a plan. All I knew was that I deserved more than being treated like a maid in my own home. I deserved more than being made to choose between love and self-respect. And in that moment, I chose me. People always say you should look for the red flags early on. But what do you do when the red flags come wrapped in love, charm, and warm smiles? When I first met Daniel, he was everything I had dreamed of. He held doors open, remembered small details, brought flowers to my work just because. I was fresh out of nursing school, renting a tiny room near the hospital, eating noodles for dinner every other night. And then, this tall, calm man with kind eyes showed up in my life and made everything feel safe. We dated for a year before he proposed. It was simple. Just the two of us at a quiet restaurant, his hands shaking as he slid the ring on my finger. I said yes, with tears in my eyes. I believed, with all my heart, that we would build something beautiful together. And for a while, We did. The first few years of our marriage were good. We were broke, but happy. We laughed a lot. Took weekend trips when we could. Even talked about having kids once we got more stable. I worked nights. He worked days. We would leave notes for each other on the fridge. I still have some of them in a box somewhere. Don't forget to eat. Or, missed you this morning. But everything changed the day his mother moved in. It was supposed to be temporary. Evelyn had fallen and broken her wrist, and Daniel said she needed help for a few weeks. I agreed, of course. She was family. But a few weeks turned into months, then years. At first, I tried. I really did. I made her tea just the way she liked it, bought her a new robe, drove her to appointments. I thought, if I just showed her kindness, we'd get along. But Evelyn didn't want kindness. She wanted control. She would rearrange the kitchen cabinets without asking, comment on how I dressed for work. Too tight, too colorful. You'll tempt the wrong kind of men. She criticized how I cooked, how I walked, even how I folded napkins. Once, she told me my laugh was too loud for a woman. Daniel didn't see it. Or maybe he just chose not to. When I'd bring up her comments, he'd brush them off. "She's just old-fashioned," he'd say. "She doesn't mean anything by it." And then he'd turn up the volume on the TV, and that would be the end of the conversation. I tried to keep the peace. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that maybe if I worked harder, things would get better. I picked up extra shifts to pay for groceries and Evelyn's medication. I cooked dinner every night, even when I was running on 4 hours of sleep. I cleaned every corner of the house while Evelyn sat and barked orders like she was royalty. Still, it was never enough. One night, I made her favorite stew and set the table early. She looked at it, sniffed, and said, "Too salty." Then she pushed her plate away and walked out. Daniel didn't say a word. That was the night I sat in the bathroom, door locked, and cried into a towel so no one would hear me. I felt like a stranger in my own home. A maid. A ghost. And the worst part? I missed my husband, even though he was sleeping in the same bed. The man who used to bring me soup when I had the flu now barely looked up when I walked into the room. He was tired, too. I knew that. But he didn't fight for me. He didn't stand by me. He let his mother chip away at me piece by piece. So by the time he gave me the ultimatum, something in me had already begun to die. Not my love, not yet, but my hope. Hope that he would see me, defend me, choose me. Looking back now, maybe the real ultimatum didn't come that night in the kitchen. Maybe it started long before. In every moment, he stayed silent when he should have stood up. If I had to pinpoint the exact moment things changed for me, not outside but inside, it would be the night Evelyn called me a temptress. It was a quiet evening. I had come home from a long shift and decided to take a hot shower. My back ached, my feet were swollen, and my head felt heavy. I didn't have the energy to cook a full dinner, so I made something simple, just stir-fried noodles and vegetables. Evelyn didn't touch hers. She sat across the table, arms crossed, lips tight, just staring at me. I ignored it at first. I was used to her looks, her sighs, her silent judgments. But then she said it. "You should stop dressing like a temptress around my son." At first, I thought I misheard her. I blinked. "Excuse me?" She looked me straight in the eye. "You walk around this house with your wet hair and tight clothes, tempting him. Have you no shame? A decent woman respects her home." I looked down at what I was wearing, my usual scrubs and a cardigan. My hair was damp from the shower, but pulled back. Nothing about me screamed temptress. I was exhausted, tired in my bones. But she meant it. And worse, she believed it. My hands clenched in my lap, but I kept my voice calm. "Evelyn, I live here too, and I am his wife." She scoffed. "For now." I stood up and left the table. I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't even look at Daniel, who sat beside her silently, eating as if nothing had happened. Later that night, I overheard something that stayed with me like a bruise that wouldn't fade. I had gotten up to use the bathroom. The hallway was dark, and I paused when I heard Evelyn's voice coming from the living room. "She's too independent," she was whispering. "You need a wife who knows her place." Daniel didn't reply right away. I waited, holding my breath, praying I'd hear him say something, anything, in my defense. But all he said was, "She's just tired. Work wears her down." Then Evelyn replied, "A real wife doesn't let work get in the way of her home." Silence followed. I tiptoed back to the bedroom, crawled into bed, and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. That was the turning point for me. Not the insult, not the silence, but the realization that the man I loved didn't love all of me. He loved the idea of me, the version of me that smiled and cooked and said nothing back. He didn't want a partner. He wanted someone who would fade quietly into the background. And Evelyn? She made sure I knew that every single day. The little things began to stack up after that. She started reorganizing my closet, claiming it was too messy. She threw out my favorite mug because it had a tiny chip. She began turning off the water heater before I showered, just to make a point. I stopped reacting, not because I was strong, but because I was tired. I became quieter at home. I smiled less. I spent more time in the hospital, picking up extra shifts, staying longer than I needed to, just to avoid going back. At work, I felt respected. Patients called me kind. Colleagues invited me to lunch. I was Claire there. Not a problem, not a threat, not invisible. At home, I was just her. Her. The one who didn't cook the right way. Her. The one who didn't respect the mother-in-law. Her. The wife who somehow wasn't enough. But deep down, something had begun to shift. Quietly, slowly, like a seed pushing through cracked pavement. I started saving a little money from each paycheck. Nothing big. Just enough for a plan I hadn't fully formed yet. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't keep living like that. And I knew, the next time he made me choose between my dignity and my marriage, I wouldn't hesitate. The funny thing about leaving is you always think it'll be louder, more dramatic. I thought I'd cry, scream, slam the door. But when I walked out of that house, it was quiet, peacefully quiet. The rain was light that night. My suitcase bumped along the sidewalk as I walked away from the life I had built for 8 years. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay another minute in that house. I had a little over $120 in my bank account. Not much, but enough to get a motel room for a few nights. I found one not too far from the hospital. It smelled like bleach and cigarette smoke, but at least it had a lock on the door. The first night, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, still in my scrubs. My hands were shaking. I kept checking my phone, but there were no messages. No calls. Not from Daniel. Not even a cruel one from Evelyn. That silence hurt more than anything. But at the same time, I felt lighter. Like I could breathe without tiptoeing around someone's feelings. I didn't have to explain why I was tired or apologize for not seasoning food her way. I was alone, but I wasn't invisible anymore. The next morning, I went straight to work. I asked to pick up extra shifts. I told them I was going through a housing issue and needed the hours. My supervisor nodded and quietly added me to the night roster. For the next 5 days, I worked like a machine. Double shifts. No days off. I slept in the motel during the day, barely enough to keep my eyes open. I skipped meals to save money. Instant noodles and crackers became my routine. But one night, I broke. I was sitting in the break room at the hospital, barely keeping my eyes open, when my coworker Maya walked in. She was a nurse too, younger than me, loud, funny, always wore bright scrubs with cartoon characters on them. She stopped when she saw me curled up on the couch. "You okay?" she asked. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." She sat beside me. You've been wearing the same 2 pairs of scrubs all week." I laughed a little, embarrassed. "Yeah, laundry's not really an option right now." She didn't ask questions. She just said, "You hungry?" and handed me half her sandwich. I took it. And then, without meaning to, I started to cry. Not the loud kind of cry. The quiet, tired kind. The kind where your chest hurts and your hands shake and you can't stop even if you try. Maya didn't say anything for a minute. Then she whispered, "Do you need a place to crash?" I looked at her, stunned. She smiled. "I've got a spare room, no strings, just until you figure things out." I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to be a burden, but I also knew I couldn't keep sleeping in a room that smelled like mold and sadness. The next morning, I checked out of the motel and moved into Maya's apartment. It was small, colorful, and smelled like cinnamon and lavender. Her spare room had mismatched pillows and a mattress on the floor, but to me it felt like luxury. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. Maya never pried. She let me be quiet when I needed to. She made me laugh when I forgot how. I was still hurting, still figuring things out. But slowly, I started feeling human again. I still hadn't heard from Daniel. No, "Are you safe?" No, "Come back." Not even a, "Why did you leave?" At first, that silence made me angry, but then I realized it also gave me permission to move on. He had made his choice, and now so had I. I didn't have much, no fancy apartment, no big savings, no promises, but I had peace, and that was more than I'd had in years. I didn't know what life looked like in that house after I left. For the first few days, I didn't care. I was too busy surviving, working, and trying to find solid ground again. But eventually, through quiet whispers at church and the occasional text from neighbors, I started to hear bits and pieces. Evelyn wasn't coping well. Apparently, she expected me to come crawling back within days. She thought I was just acting out, the way she used to call it whenever I stood up for myself. But when a week passed and I still hadn't returned, things began to fall apart. Slowly, at first. Then, all at once. I heard from a mutual neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, that Evelyn had tried cooking one night and burned the stew. Daniel was late from work and there was no dinner on the table. She threw a tantrum, pots slamming, yelling, but there was no one there to clean up after her. And Daniel? He just told her to order takeout. The house that I used to keep spotless was now a mess. Dishes piled up in the sink, towels left on the floor. Evelyn had spent so long telling me I didn't do anything right, but now she had to face what life looked like without me doing anything at all. I'll admit it. There was a part of me that felt satisfied. Not out of cruelty, but out of justice. I had given so much of myself to that home, and they never noticed. Now, without me, every little thing they took for granted became a burden. Daniel struggled too. He'd never done the laundry, not even once in 8 years. I used to sort, wash, dry, fold, and iron his clothes without a word. Now he was calling the laundromat in frustration because he didn't know how to get ink stains out of his shirts. He even wore the same button-down twice in 1 week to the office, and people noticed. One night, Evelyn slipped in the bathroom. There was water on the tile and no one had cleaned it up. She didn't break anything, but she bruised her hip badly. She tried to call Daniel from the floor, but his phone was on silent. She sat there crying, all alone. It hit her then. I had always been the one who kept her safe, the one who made sure the floor was dry, her medication was on time, her tea was warm. The same woman who called me useless had quietly relied on me for everything. Daniel came home late that night and found her on the couch, still sniffling. He asked what happened, and Evelyn, too proud to admit the truth, blamed it on the poor house conditions. He snapped. For the first time in years, Daniel yelled. Not at me. At her. Mrs. Delaney said she heard him through the walls. Maybe if you hadn't driven her away, we wouldn't be living like this, he shouted. Evelyn tried to defend herself, saying I was weak and dramatic. But Daniel wasn't having it. "I was wrong," he said. "I let you poison everything." That part surprised me, because Daniel had always chosen silence, always taken the easy way out. But now, with his mother in tears and the house falling apart, he finally saw what I had endured. Still, he didn't call me. Not right away. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he didn't know what to say. But I knew deep down that something had shifted. Meanwhile, I was settling into Maya's apartment. It wasn't perfect. We had to share one bathroom and the walls were thin. But there was laughter in that space. Peace. No one barked orders at me or criticized how I folded the towels. I was still working overtime, but now I was saving money. I had opened a small savings account in my name, something I hadn't done in years. For the first time in forever, I had control over my own life. And somewhere, back in that house I used to call home, Evelyn was realizing she no longer controlled hers. It was a Tuesday night when it happened. I'd just finished another 12-hour shift at the hospital. My legs felt like bricks, and all I wanted was a hot shower and silence. Maya wasn't home. She had gone to visit her mom for a few days, so I had the apartment to myself. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag by the door, and finally checked my phone. And there they were, 50 missed calls. All from Daniel. I froze. At first, I thought my phone had glitched. 50? That couldn't be right. I scrolled down. Missed call, missed call, missed call. Then came the voicemails. 1, 2, 3, 8 in total. My heart pounded as I tapped the first one. It was his voice, shaky and desperate. "Claire, please pick up. Something's happened. It's Mom. She's in the hospital. I didn't know who else to call." I sat down on the edge of the couch, my hands trembling. The next message came in right after. She collapsed. She was complaining about chest pain, and then she just fell. I didn't know what to do. I panicked. "I should have called you sooner. Please, Claire, I'm sorry. I need you." I let it play all the way through. Each voicemail was a mix of panic and guilt. In one, he was crying. In another, he apologized for everything. Then, in the last one, he whispered, "I don't know how to do this without you." And that broke something inside me. Because for years, I had done everything without anyone. I had carried that house on my back, cared for his mother, cleaned, cooked, worked double shifts, smiled through insults. And now that I was gone, now that things were falling apart, he suddenly remembered my worth. I stared at my phone for a long time. I didn't call back. I didn't text. I just sat there, breathing slowly, letting every emotion wash over me like a wave I couldn't stop. Part of me wanted to ignore it. After all, Evelyn had never treated me like family. She had never shown me an ounce of kindness. And Daniel? He'd watched me crumble in silence. But I'm not heartless. I'm tired. I'm angry. But not heartless. So I made a decision. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't call him back. I just took a cab to the hospital where he said she was. The same hospital I worked in. I didn't even know what I'd say when I got there. I just knew I had to see things for myself. When I walked through the ER doors, it was like stepping into another life. Daniel was sitting in the waiting area, hunched over with his face in his hands. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes red like he hadn't slept. He looked up and froze when he saw me. "Claire," he whispered. I said nothing. He stood slowly, like he didn't believe I was really there. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I didn't know who else—" "Where is she?" I asked, cutting him off. He pointed toward the ICU. I walked past him without another word. Evelyn was lying in bed, pale and hooked up to machines. She looked smaller than I remembered, weaker. The woman who used to bark commands at me could barely lift her eyes. When she saw me, something flickered in her expression. Regret? Shame? I couldn't tell. But she didn't speak. I didn't stay long. just long enough to see that she was stable, breathing, awake. Then I turned and walked out of the room. Daniel was still waiting in the hall. "Claire," he said softly, "I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't realize how much you did until you were gone." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel anger. I just felt done. "I came to make sure she was okay," I said quietly. "That's all." He opened his mouth to say something, but I shook my head. "Don't call me unless it's an emergency," I said, and no, this wasn't one. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't plan to return. After leaving the hospital that night, I told myself it was over, not just the situation with Evelyn, but everything. The marriage, the house, the life I had poured myself into. It was all behind me now. But 3 days later, I got a call. Not from Daniel. From one of the doctors at the hospital. Someone I'd worked with before. Evelyn had taken a turn. Nothing life-threatening, just complications. Stress, they said. She was refusing treatment, barely eating. "She asked for you," the doctor told me gently. I stood there, phone in hand, staring at the floor for a long time. Why now? Why after everything? I didn't want to go. Part of me felt like walking in there would be admitting something, like I still cared, but another part of me, maybe the part that hadn't completely hardened yet, needed closure. So I went. Evelyn was sitting up this time, frail and silent, staring out the window. Daniel was in the chair next to her, looking exhausted, his face thinner than before. He stood when he saw me. "Claire." I gave him a small nod but didn't say anything. Evelyn turned slowly. Her eyes met mine. She didn't glare, didn't scoff. She just looked tired. "I didn't think you'd come," she said softly. I took a step closer but didn't sit. I wasn't going to. Silence filled the room. "I treated you badly," she said after a while. Her voice was raspy. "I was afraid of being replaced." I didn't respond. I didn't know how. Daniel shifted in his seat. "She's been asking for you every day since you left the other night." I glanced at him, then back at Evelyn. "You didn't just treat me badly," I said. "You belittled me, you used me, and he let you." Daniel lowered his eyes. Evelyn didn't argue. "I cooked your meals, cleaned your messes, took care of your medicine, and not once did you say thank you," I continued. "I gave everything to that house, and I was treated like a stranger, like a servant." Evelyn nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "I see it now." I crossed my arms. "Do you?" She looked up at me again. "Yes, I do. And I'm sorry." Her voice cracked on the last word. I stood there, letting it sink in. The apology I once begged for, the recognition I had stopped hoping to receive, and yet, it didn't feel like victory. It just felt final. "I forgive you," I said softly. "Not for you. For me." Daniel looked up. "Claire, I've made mistakes too. I should have defended you. I should have—" "Stop," I said. "You had years to stand up for me. You didn't." He opened his mouth to respond, but I raised a hand. "I'm not here to relive the past," I said. "I came to say goodbye." Evelyn closed her eyes. "You were a good wife. Better than I deserved." I didn't reply. Daniel stepped toward me. "Claire, please, can we try again? I've changed. I see everything now. I want to do better." I looked at him and felt no anger, no sadness, no longing, just peace. "No, Daniel," I said. "You didn't lose me when I walked out. You lost me long before that. Every time you stayed silent, every time you chose her over me." He didn't argue. He just stood there, his face pale. I walked to the door, then paused and looked back. "Take care of her. Not because you owe her, but because you'll want someone to care for you when you're older." He nodded slowly. I left without another word. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. I felt the warmth on my skin and smiled. I wasn't broken, I wasn't bitter. I was free. That chapter of my life had closed, and this time it wasn't with a bang or a fight. It ended with truth, with clarity, and with me, walking away, not with pain, but with power.